Welcome to What's Math. Please subscribe to my channel, like and share my videos. This video will focus on quadratic equations with an emphasis on solving by factoring. Step 1. Factor. Before you can factor, please, it's super important to ensure that the equation is equal to 0. You want it to be in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Step 2. Set each parentheses or factor equal to 0. Step 3. Solve. Example. Solve x squared minus 5x equal to 66. The first thing that I notice is that the equation is not equal to 0, so therefore I need to move the 66 on the right side. The opposite of a positive 66 is negative 66. So therefore, I'm going to subtract 66 from both sides. Now we end up with x squared minus 5x minus 66 is equal to 0. Now that it's equal to 0, we can go ahead and factor. And if by the end of this video you still need more clarification on factoring, please go and watch my videos on factoring quadratics. Okay, so what do I want to know? I want to know two numbers that multiply to give me 66, but if I subtract it, I get 5. So therefore, I'm reading it backwards. Two numbers that multiply to give me 66, but if I subtract them, I get 5. And those two numbers are 11 and 6. So 11 times 6 is equal to 66. And 11 minus 6 is equal to 5. I'm going to go ahead and put the two factors inside the parentheses with an x, where the x comes first and the factors come to the back of the parentheses. The only problem now is to figure out what sign goes inside the two parentheses. Because c is a negative 66, we know that one has to be positive and one has to be negative. Why? Positive times a negative is equal to negative, and a negative times a positive is equal to a negative. So in both situations, the signs are different. But don't fear. We're going to take a good look at b, and b is negative 5. Because b is negative 5, the 11, which is the biggest factor, will take the sign of the b, so therefore the 11 will be negative. So if the 11 is negative, that means the 6 will automatically be positive. So now we have x plus 6 times x minus 11 equal to 0. Then we need to set each parentheses equal to 0. So we're going to have x plus 6 equal to 0. X minus 11 is equal to 0. Now we need to solve those two equations. The opposite of plus 6 is negative 6, so therefore I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. So x is equal to negative 6. The opposite of minus 11 is to add 11, so I'm going to add 11 to both sides. X is therefore equal to 11. Now for my final answer, x is equal to negative 6 and 11. Example. Solve 8x squared minus 23x minus 3 equal to 0. If we take a good look, we notice that a is not equal to 1, so therefore we have to do a times c. A is 8 and c is negative 3. So now we're going to do a times c, which is 8 times negative 3 equals to negative 24. Now we're going to read from that negative 24. So we want to know two numbers that multiply to give you 24, but when you subtract them, is equal to 23. 3. Those two numbers are 24 and 1. Once again, A times C is negative in this situation, so therefore 1 has to be positive and 1 has to be negative. How do we know which one is positive? Is it the 24 or is it the 1? We always focus on the biggest. The biggest is 24, and it takes a sign of B, and in this case B is negative 23, so therefore it's going to be negative 24 and 1. We're going to rewrite the B using those two factors, so therefore it's going to be 8x squared plus 1x minus 24x minus 3 equal to 0. I know we don't have to write that 1 as a coefficient, but it's going to come in handy when I'm factoring, so I'm going to leave it there. Double check the middle to make sure that it's the same. 1x minus 24x is negative 23x, so therefore I did not change the value of the equation. I'm going to go ahead and factor the first pair, so the 8x squared plus the 1x. And if I break it down, it will be 8 times x plus 1 times x. Now I need to figure out what is common in both terms. And I realize that both of them has an x in it. That x is known as the greatest common factor. It goes on the outside, and everything else goes inside of a parentheses from left to right. So it's going to be x times 8x plus 1. So everything that is not circled goes inside of the parentheses. If you factor properly, both parentheses should be exactly the same. So therefore, I know my second parentheses would be 8x plus 1. And that will save me time from factoring the last pair of negative 24x minus 3. Now, how do we figure out what goes in between the two parentheses? What is the greatest common factor for the second parentheses? And the shortcut to it is always going to be C divided by the last inside of the parentheses. The C in the given problem is negative 3, and the last in the parentheses is 1. So therefore it's going to be negative 3 divided by 1 equal to negative 3. That negative 3 is what goes in front of the second parentheses. That is the GCF of the second pair. You can double check. Negative 3 times 8x is negative 24x. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Now, to finish off the factor, it's going to be outside times the inside. So the outside from left to right is x minus 3, and inside the parentheses is 8x plus 1. So now we're going to have x minus 3 times 8x plus 1 equal to 0. Now we need to set both parentheses equal to 0. So we're going to have x minus 3 equal to 0 and 8x plus 1 equal to 0. To solve x minus 3 equal to 0, we need to add 3 to both sides. X is equal to 3. First, to solve the 8x plus 1, we need to move the 1. So it's going to be minus 1 from both sides. So 8x is equal to negative 1. To get rid of the coefficient, which means multiplication here, we need to do the opposite, which is to divide both sides by 8. So x is equal to negative 1 over 8. For my final answer, x is equal negative 1 over 8 and 3. We always try to put our answer in numerical order from least to greatest. Now let's go ahead and check for understanding. Go ahead and solve x squared plus 3x equals to 28. And for a challenge, go ahead and solve 8x squared plus 21x minus 9 equal to 0. Solution. Solve x squared plus 3x equals 28. We realize that is not equal to 0, so we have to make it equal to 0 by subtracting 28 from both sides. So x squared plus 3x minus 28 is equal to 0. We need to factor. Now that is equal to 0, so I want to know what two numbers multiply to give me 28, but if I subtract them, I get 3. And those two numbers is 7 and 4. So 7 times 4 is equal to 28, and 7 minus 4 is equal to 3. We're going to put them inside the parentheses where the x should come first and the factors come second inside of the parentheses. The only thing left for us to do is to figure out the signs inside the parentheses. And since C is negative, we know that one has to be positive, one has to be negative, but it's easy to figure out which one is which by looking at the biggest factor, and the biggest factor is 7, and 7 take the sign of B is a positive 3, so therefore the 7 is positive and the 4 is negative. And you can double check. 7 minus 4 is 3. 7 times negative 4 is negative 28, so it does make sense. Set each of them equal to 0. So x plus 7 equals 0 and x minus 4 equals to 0. Subtract 7 from both sides. X is equal to negative 7. Add 4 to both sides. Therefore, x is equal to 4. So my final answer, x is equal to negative 7 and 4. Solution. Solve 8x squared plus 21x minus 9 equal to 0. Because a is not equal to 1, we need to find out what is a times c. So therefore, a times c is equal to 8 times negative 9, which equals to negative 72. We want to know two numbers that multiply to give you 72, but if you subtract them, you get 21. Those two numbers were 3 and 24. Because it's a negative product of a times c, we know that one is going to be positive and one is going to be negative. And the biggest one takes the sign of B, and since it's a positive 21, that means the 24 will be positive, so it's a negative 3 and a positive 24. We're going to use those two factors to rewrite the middle, remove the B and replace it with the negative 3x and then positive 24x. So we're going to have 8x squared minus 3x plus 24x minus 9 equal to 0. You can double check. Negative 3x plus 24x is 21x. Know that we have is the value is the same. We're not changing the value of the equation. We can go ahead and simple factor the first pair. So it's going to be 8 times x minus 3 times x. We want to figure out what both terms has in common and realize that both of them have an x in common. And that is a GCF, so therefore it's going to be x times 8x minus 3 because everything that is not circled goes inside of the parentheses from left to right. Both parentheses has to be the same. For me to find the GCF of the second parentheses, it's going to be c divided by the last in the parentheses. C is negative 9 and the last in the parentheses is negative 3. So therefore it's going to be negative 9 divided by negative 3, which is equal to positive 3. That positive 3 is the GCF of the second parentheses, so therefore is a plus 3 in front of the second parentheses. Is now to finish the factoring is going to be outside times inside. And going from left to right is x then plus 3. So therefore, it's going to be x plus 3 times 8x minus 3 equal to 0. We're going to go ahead and set each factor equal to 0. So therefore, x plus 3 is equal to 0, and 8x minus 3 is also equal to 0. We're going to go ahead and subtract 3 from both sides. So now we have x equal negative 3. To solve the 8x minus 3 equal to 0, we need to add 3 to both sides. Now we have 8x equals 3. To get rid of the coefficient of 8, we need to divide both sides by 8. Now we end up with x equal 3 over 8. So for my final answer, x is equal negative 3 and 3 over 8. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Click that little bell for further notification. Like and share my videos. If you like what you saw in this video, feel free to buy me a cup of coffee. It's not mandatory, but thank you in advance.